what a life could you have in the formative years of raising your family to work 3 days a week, have a $3 million practice, taking home $1 million a year? You can't do that in too many places. I mean, it's just so good. And it's there for you, even in a slow economy, because the practices that are growing are the ones that are in groups and the digital-centric practices. Those two practices are kicking ass right now. And so it's there for you. But no, I would say anybody that wants to have a $3 million practice can.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs podcast. I'm Dr. Glenn Krieger, your host, and today we have somebody who I'm going to embarrass him a little bit. He is one of my favorite, most trusted, arguably one of the most knowledgeable people in our industry that we can ever glean knowledge from. And so put your hands together, give a warm Orthopreneurs welcome. I just want to say it, okay? Doctor. I just want to say doctor. Dr. Chris, it sounds so good, Chris. Dr. Chris Bentson. It sounds so great. He's a partner at Bentson, Koppel and Associates, and he's not a doctor, folks. I'm sorry. But if we were giving out one of these honorary doctors that they give to people who do commencement addresses, you would be I'm giving it to you, okay? I think I have as much clout to give it to you through Orthopreneurs University as anybody else. So from now on, you are officially Dr. Chris Bentson. But thank you, Chris, for being here today. I really appreciate you.
These are always fun, Glenn, and you make them so easy because I think you and I could just sit down and talk about orthodontics for several days, and it's just hard to pare down what do you want to talk about today. But thanks for having me, and welcome to those who are listening.
Yeah, I'll start off by saying this. If you don't know who Chris Bentson is, if you're a normal listener to the podcast and you don't know who this gentleman is, I think it's just a safe, and you can't comment on this at all, Chris, so I'm just going to say it. He's, in my opinion, because I don't want to just single him out, he's among the most honest, knowledgeable people in the practice, brokerage, transition space. If someone's looking to bring in a partner, or someone wants to be a partner, or somebody's looking to sell a practice, or they want to associate with an OSO or DSO, there is nobody I trust more in the industry than the guy who's on this podcast today. And the things he's told me over the years have not only been personal counsel for me in my decision-making process, but actually turn out to be right most of the time. That's the Oracle from Omaha. We got to come up with one from North Carolina. Warren Buffett's the Oracle from Omaha. We got to come up with a good name for you, Chris. I'm going to work on that one.
I'll probably blow that whole idea because I think I predicted this year was going to be pretty hot, and last year anyways. And it turns out I think I'm a 12 months off, but okay. Sometimes it goes slower.
How about the know-it-all from North Carolina? That doesn't quite sound as good. It doesn't sound as good, but you just hit on something. Let's talk about that. So for most of the people listening right now, if they're not necessarily plugged in to a mastermind group, right? If they're not part of, say, a Schulman or an Orthopreneurs RD, they practice alone, most of them. The statistics will bear that out, and they know what they know. So the overwhelming majority of doctors who I speak to, right, who are just single practices, they might have a partner, but they don't really interact with a lot of other folks, don't realize where they fit in the broader landscape of today's economic environment for orthodontics. So let's start here. It is, as recording this, it's almost August of 2024. When you speak to orthodontists, what are you hearing from most of them? If you ask them, how have the last 12 months been for you? What are you hearing? And what does statistics tell us?
I think there's a bit of a wet blanket feel of, man, it's not great right now for growth. And that's true. Wasn't great for growth last year. That was true. Wasn't great the year before. That was true. And so I've got a ton of data, but there's one chart that I love looking at that shows patient start growth in the United States over the last 40 years, just in orthodontics. And so there's only been 3 times in the last 40 years that we've had 2 down start years in a row. And one was after the dot-com boom, and one was after the housing bubble. And now we have 22 was down versus 21, 23 was down. We find ourselves, give or take 7 months into 24, and we're down. If we finish this year down, which I expect we will, it'll be the first time in 40 years we've had 3 down years in a row. So there's a bit of a malaise out there, mostly on the independent doctor side, as you suggested. Who's doing well out there? People who are in community. Who are those? Those are group doctor practices. Those are folks that are in OSOs, DSOs, or RD groups or study clubs where they're really plugged in and they're sharing data and they're taking best practices and applying those to their practice. But the independent doctor, I've said so many times in my lectures, I mean, the loneliest place in American business is to be an entrepreneur, a solo owner, because you got to be, good at everything, and you're making all the decisions yourself, and you're very isolated and kind of on an island. And I think there's a number of your colleagues out there that are in that spot, and they don't feel really good about things. So I said in January that I thought 24 would be Groundhog Day to 23. It's turning out that looks pretty accurate. We're actually down about double what we were down in 23, but we've got still, hopefully we'll have a strong August. I don't think July was that great, and not as great as folks would have wanted. And then you enter that fourth quarter, which is, dicey. So because you got the holidays, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not.
I even heard there's an election this year.
Yeah, well, and those are the other three outliers. I've been saying after the election, there's just a lot of pent-up angst in the country, and I think people don't make as many buying decisions for elective things like ortho when you don't feel great about what's going on either locally or in the world or geopolitically. And so we'll get past that. That's 100 days away. It appears that in 45 days, we may get that first interest rate cut that we've been looking for a year. That's going to help a lot. And I think the interest rates will start to come down after the first one pretty quickly, at least the next 150 basis points. And so, things are going to look really good in 25, 6, and 7. If you go back to that chart I was talking about, when we were down 2 years after the dot-com boom, the 2 years after those two down years, we were plus 12%. And you need to realize that 3% year-over-year growth is the historical average in ortho. So it was 4 times the growth the next 2 years. If you look at after the dot-com or the housing bubble, when we were down, if you look at the 2 years post those two down years, we're up 27%. And so there's pent-up demand. These kids aren't getting treated by your local dentist. They're not going to get treated. They're going to get treated. They're going to be a little bit older, and you've got to have, your engine really tuned up to a high level to take some of this growth. But we are going to begin to see growth in 25. Maybe it's the second half. Maybe it's a little bit earlier. I don't know. And then 6 and 7 are going to be good. So I'm looking for 6, 7, 8 organic growth across the country, and that means the good practices will do double that, and everybody should be feeling better soon. And so that's the good news. Very optimistic about that. I think historical data in finance and in business is helpful, and all the charts are telling us that good times are ahead. We're near the bottom and coming out of it.
Thank you, and that's why I love talking to you, Chris, because you actually have data. You don't make stuff up. Well, I feel like it's you have actual data. And my question for you is, you sort of referred to it a little bit. Your feeling is that the down 22, 23, 24 is not a function of the other pressures on the market, meaning general dentists taking on way more cases. At-home aligners in 22 and 23 certainly could have played a role, but the general sense, and I don't know how people measure this, is that it's just people not getting treated, and that they're going to come to market when the economy turns around?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, anytime in my career, 35 years, so I missed 5 of those 40 years that I have the chart for, but anytime we've had, financial downturn, the GPs look to do one thing because they're suffering from the same thing the orthodontists are, and that's how do I grow my revenue? Hey, I'll try some easy braces cases, and then after the cases get back, they divorce themselves of. So, are the GPs doing more ortho today than they were 3 years ago? I think so, but are they going to continue to do that? I think not. Although the DSOs and the OSOs are getting more sophisticated in that, so that may play a percentage or two. And then you've got, the adult patient base. We all know what happened, post-COVID. That's been, talked about ad nauseum. The adults are gone. I mean, if you listen to the Align call last week, they made their quarter revenue-wise, but, if you look at the North American adult cases, they're gone. I mean, in double digits from 2 years ago. And they have been for several years. Are they going to come back? Maybe it's not linear, but yeah, they will come back. There's a lot of people that got treatment, and 70% of our adult starts were treated as adolescents. And so that's still there. I think we have to learn as a specialty some things that we've been afraid to and have been slow to learn. And on the adult side, it's 2 things. One is you've got to speak to adults about convenience and efficiency. And that means they don't want to come in and see you. They want to know what the price is before they get there. They want
Right.
flexibility in that price, and they don't care about perfect occlusion. Orthodontists still have a hard time with that. We lost Smile Direct Club, yay, but that was 18,000 starts a year. Where are those people going to? You look at the Align data from their quarterly call last week. They were off in North American starts, but what was through the roof was their DSP plan. What is that? That is targeted at minor tooth movement cases. So, you're starting to get it, but you've got to talk to those people. You got to talk to them in a different way. On a 1 to 10, I ask an orthodontist all the time, how efficient are you? How convenient are you? I'm a 9. And I
Yeah,
say, well,
sure.
I can't debate you, but let's just ask a different question. How much more would you need to do to be a 10? And maybe that's the right mindset that you guys need to have. But all of you can be more efficient. All of you can be more convenient. And that's the number one thing the consumer wants of orthodontics, whether it's an adult or a parent. Who's at capacity? Not orthodontists. Who's at capacity with their time? Families. And they want better convenience and more efficiency out of you than they're getting today. And the practices that are providing that are winning.
Yeah, well said. And it is interesting. And again, I don't want to have you comment on this because I don't want to put you in this position that I'm happy to always be in. But orthodontists, for really smart people, delude themselves on a regular basis with self-assessment. With self-assessment, I'm not saying all orthodontists. I would just say 99.9% of them. Because when I ask orthodontists, oh, what do you think of this? What they say and what they're doing are so because I'll ask questions, follow up. Okay, cool. You're doing that. Well, how does this? Well, I'm not really doing that well. Well, you just said you're doing it amazingly well. And once you start diving in, I don't think that most orthodontists are lying. I think they're so good at what they do well that they often don't stop and look at what they don't do well. Right? It's almost like the old computer. You and I are of a certain age. We can remember the old Star Trek episodes and the computer where I think Captain Kirk gets the computer to explode because he says, tell a lie. Well, I can't tell a lie. Well, are you lying now? No. Yes. No. Like the brain starts short circuiting because he can't tell because it can't lie, but you're lying now. And the whole thing, it just works that way.
Yeah.
So going back to, again, some of the things you said were just incredible. And when we talk about the practices that orthodontists have and what they can be, I had a post in Orthopreneurs. You're one of the few people who's non-orthodontist, although you are now Dr. Chris Bentson. You're one of the few non-orthodontists who's in the group because you were there at the beginning. And I couldn't imagine having any group related to finance, leadership, management, and ortho without having Chris Bentson in it. But I did a post a couple of weeks ago that said, if you hear the term $3 million practice and you think it's impossible, you're hanging out with the wrong tribe of people. First, and a quick answer from you. You've done this how many years now? You said 35 years you've been
35, yeah.
in 35 years, it's changed a lot, right? Because dollars are worth more today than they were then. Although if we ask ourselves, what are we charging by case versus 35 years ago, it hasn't changed quite as
Not that much
dramatically.
more, yeah.
But my question for you is nowadays, 2024, would you call a $3 million practice a large practice by any stretch of the imagination?
I would call it a large practice, but it's a standard, size that we see all the
Right.
time now with one doctor. And,
Yeah.
I talk so much about this, Glenn, because it's so much better today than it was 25 years ago, 35 years ago. I mean, there's so many more options,
Oh my
and
gosh.
they're not moral options that are good or bad. They just are options. And so that's a great thing. You can have kind of whatever you want. But who really gets the $3-4 million practice, in my opinion? 35 to 45-year-old orthodontist. I mean, orthodontists my whole career said, Chris, if I just had more time, I'd be happier. Well, now you have more time. You can do, I've seen $3.5-4.5 million practices 3 days a week with no digital homework and
Yeah.
operating at 55% overhead. That's available to anyone that wants it. The problem is my cohort, they know what they're good at. You kind of alluded to this before, and they're really comfortable and really good, and they make a great living doing what they know how to do. And so they don't want to change. So that's okay.
Right.
The next generation will. But, I think if I'm out there with a digital product and, with digital braces, aligners, monitoring, I'm just going to talk to 35 to 45-year-olds as much as I can because those doctors understand it. And when you look at the cohort, even gender wise, I mean, I think this year's class is 62% female. And it's just crazy. But, what a life could you have in the formative years of raising your family to work 3 days a week, have a $3 million practice, taking home $1 million a year. You can't do that in too many places. I mean, it's just so good. And it's there for you, even in a slow economy, because, the practices that are growing are the ones that are in groups and the digital centric practices. Those two practices are kicking ass right now. And so it's there for you. But no, I would say anybody that wants to have a $3 million practice can. And early part of my career, if you had $1 million practice, you were great, but you were soldering bands.
Yeah.
There's just so much you
Sledging
could do.
bands.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I posted in Orthopreneurs and I said, hey, if you want a $3 million practice, if you hear a $3 million practice and you think it's unattainable, you're hanging out with the wrong group of people, DM me. And I got like 50 messages from doctors. And this is in no way whatsoever judging anybody, because we all run our own race, right? We all have our own challenges. So I never, ever, ever will cast aspersions at somebody who says, Glenn, I'm doing $1.3 million and I don't know what to do. I'm torn. That's a person reaching out wants help. And I'm thrilled in my position running Orthopreneurs and being somebody who's out there and not afraid to challenge the norms, that I'm happy to connect with these people and have conversations. And I do, and I give advice. Half the time when I give advice, I don't get another response back. Hey, do you have a written plan? Do you have a written plan of what you want? Do you know exactly what you want and steps you think you need to take to get there? Are you gathering like a moth to a flame when I say I have a class 2 corrector? But when I say, hey, here's a great tip on how to balance your P&L better, you run away the other direction. When I say, hey, here's some marketing advice, or come to Orthopreneurs Summit. No, you'd rather go to a 2-day angle course, which nothing wrong with angle, but are you focused entirely on clinical and avoiding the leadership management growth side of things? Or are you just not implementing what you're learning? Because like you said, I in RD, in the Orthopreneurs RD group, without violating any NDAs or anything like that, the average practice, we do our annual survey, the average practice is $3 million for a solo, like $3 million per practice is the average in that group. And there are people doing way more, but
Yeah.
it means there's 50% of the people in that group doing more than that, and there's 50% doing less than that. Most people that I know are hovering, and I'm talking in ortho, my cohort, the people I hang out with, are hovering between close to 3 and 5, right? To get above 4.5 or 5, it's a different animal. You need to have different systems. You need to scale differently. I hope you have a call center. I hope you've got a centralized lab. I hope you have, really good systems in place and a hierarchy of service, meaning, you have a clinical director and an administrative director who then manage the two sides of the puzzle and what have you. And it's funny because I forgot who I was talking to. I posted in Orthopreneurs and they say they were talking to Ben Fishbein, who famously got himself to $23 million in 7 years out of graduation. And he said, yeah, I got about a $3 million practice. And Ben said to them, oh, so you have a lifestyle practice. And that's exactly what it is. And the sad part in the messages I got, and I'm not judging, I'm just observing, is how many people are stuck below 3 million or far below it, number one. Number two, how they genuinely believe that having a larger practice will take a number of hours and time that they just don't have to give, when exactly the opposite is true. Because I worked way harder when my practice was 1.5 than we got to 3, 4. Like me and my partner, when we were doing 1.5, we were killing ourselves to market and grow. When we got to 6 as a partnership, all of a sudden, it became easier. We'd want people to carry the load. And the last fallacy, and I'll let you jump in after this, that really chaps my butt is when you hear a lot of the older docs, your cohort, I know best. You should have a small practice with super low overhead. Well, yeah. Wouldn't we all love to have a $2 million practice with a 30% overhead? That'd be amazing. But
It's
realistic,
interesting. Yeah.
today, with rent and cost of service and goods, no, I'm sorry. If you live in the middle of, and I don't mean this as an insult, Nowheresville, pick your state, and you're 3-hour drive from the nearest metropolitan center, you might be able to get yourself down there. But if you're working anywhere near a suburb that we would consider a normal size suburb, you're not going to get yourself down to at a you can get yourself to a $6 million practice down there because your fixed costs don't go up, but you're not going to build yourself $1.5 million practice at 35% overhead unless you completely disagree with me on this one, Chris, and I'll respect you if you do.
I don't. I mean, the average overhead in the country is just under 60%, and that's good overhead. Three or four comments. One is, a couple of myths. One is that, as you scale and add offices, your overhead goes up. Zero data in the last 20 years of doing what I'm doing now, valuation and transition data, tearing your P&Ls apart. It's not true. There's economies of scale in ortho, and they work at 3 million and above, and your overhead actually goes down. And so it doesn't cost you more to run that practice. The other big myth that I think is true almost always, not always, but almost always, is that my quality of care will be less if I'm seeing that many patients. I think that's a crutch. I don't think it's true. And I think it's individual choice. If you feel like that is for you, great, don't do it. But there are people offering unbelievably high quality orthodontic finishes that are board worthy, that are doing 4 or 5, 6 million. And so I don't think that's true.
I can name right now off the top of my head, and I won't, at least 2 to 3 dozen doctors who are doing more than 4 million a year, who put their love and sweat into their cases every single day and are turning out great results. So yeah, I agree with you 100% on that.
I just don't think that's true. And the other thing is just some perspective. I mean, I told residents, I got to spend some time with all 3 classes at University of Tennessee last Wednesday and Thursday.
Shout out to Kyle Fagala, by the way.
Yeah. And I started out telling them that everybody that's sitting around this table, at a minimum, will probably be an upper 95% earner of people, not in just the United States, but in the entire globe. 7.5 billion people. You're going to do better than 95%. You take the average practice, according to the JCO practice studies, of an independent solo practitioner is doing 1.6 million. This is self-reported data, and a lot of the bigger practices don't report, but so I think it's a little bit low. But 1.6 million at 60% overhead, that means you're making $600,000 a year for 35 years or however long you want to run, and you say this is a raw deal, a bad deal. I mean, it's just crazy how good we have it, and we just need to remember that it's not all about the money. It's a lot about the money, but it's not all about the money. But the things that you're able to do for your family, your community, your philanthropy, the things that you care about, because you happen to be gifted enough academically and disciplined enough to go through the rigor and become an orthodontist, are just off the hook, no matter what size you are. 1.2, it still works great. And so you can have whatever you want, but to throw, bleach into the eyes of the $3, $4, $5 million people and say, you're not doing as good a work as me, or I can't do that in my town, that's an excuse, and it's not true.
Yeah, I love throwing bleach in the eye. That's a great comment, because I can say if you want a $3 million practice, it's within your reach. Immediately, there'll be 6 to 8 people, the same 6 to 8 every time, who will start talking about, in Orthopreneurs, who will start talking about why a smaller practice is better, how money isn't everything. And nobody's saying money's everything. I got to be honest, if you're going to work the same amount of hours and the same effort, it's nice to make more money, right?
Yeah.
And if you're against money, donate it all. Right? Go work for the Peace Corps.
What could you do with the extra money? I mean, that's the right question to ask. I mean, what could you provide to the things you care deeply about that you can't provide today? And the answer is a lot.
A lot. You can make changes in this world in a good way. And so on that topic of money, it leads us into the next conversation point, which is OSOs and DSOs, right? Because let's step back for a second, because you made a comment before we came on the air, before we started recording, that I love. And I want you to just touch on it really fast before we get into OSOs and DSOs, which is that up to about $2 million a year, right? Practice. Typically happiness is kind of correlated, right? If we were running a study and you said, look, my practice is making $1 million a year and I'm doing it 60%, until you get about $2 million, you're going to get happier, so to speak, the more money you make. But what happens when you hit $2 million, give or take? I think $2 million was the number you said, right, Chris?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit lower than that. It's $1 million, but I mean, and this is all science. This is not philosophy or my belief. There's been all kinds of studies on this, and there's 4 longitudinal or 6 global longitudinal studies that prove this out, amongst many others. But the question that's age old is, can money buy happiness?
Right.
And everybody hears that question, they say no, but the answer is yes. Okay, and but it's up to a certain level, and so if you go from making 50,000 to 75,000, you have bought a lot of happiness and security. If you go from 75,000 to 150,000, you bought yet another staunch of happiness. But it starts to level off as you get towards $1 million of income. And all the science around happiness and wealth say that above $1 million, it doesn't matter if you have two, it doesn't matter if you have 10, it doesn't matter if you have 200 million, it doesn't matter if you have a billion. There's no incremental increase in happiness. And so money can't buy your happiness after a certain point. And I think that's a fact. And I think, we chase the ring a lot of times, and, we have our number. The numbers, I think it's dangerous to have a number because you can always imagine more. But there is no correlation between money and happiness at a certain level. And it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs on steroids. I mean, but once food, shelter, and withstanding a financial shock and giving to the things you want to give at that you could do at that level are reached, there's no more incremental self-actualization as you make more and more and more money.
Right on. So now talking about OSOs, DSOs, getting into that conversation. Number one, it's a broad conversation. We're not going to get in 15 or 20 minutes, that we have left, and we can always follow up later if we want to. But let's agree on this. We've seen lots of calculators. I have my own calculator, and I always tell people they're kind of a joke. They're entertainment, right? Because we always want to, I give it to people, and I got some really smart people, really savvy numbers who ask me a million questions. Glenn, when you're doing this, what do you think about this assumption, this assumption? And we talked about this, and I said back to him, I told you earlier, I said, okay, let me show you how this is such a joke when you're trying to figure out your numbers. I said, because next year, 2025, let's start with this one. What's your production going to be? Well, how do I know? Well, that's my point. You're trying to project something out 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You don't even know what next year's, but it's really good, in my opinion, for looking at trends. When I do this, this is what happens. If I take a whole surprise area, spoiler alert, if you take a whole boatload of money that you're paid when joining an OSO and put it into investments earlier, you come out ahead financially in the long run. I hate to break the news to everybody out there that this is such a surprise, because people will fight this tooth and nail. But generally speaking, if I give you millions and millions of dollars at age 35, you will have more money at age 45 or 50 than if you started saving every single year. But what are your thoughts on, because then I say to them, look, this isn't a decision about money, because every single person I talk to, whether they sell, join an associate, join an OSO, DSO, or don't, they're going to retire just fine. They're going to have more than enough money when they're 65 years old to do whatever they want in life, whether they join or don't join. It's semantics. The reason you join or don't join, there's other reasons to consider beyond the money side of it. Would you agree with that?
I do. I mean, to our discussion just a minute ago about happiness, I mean, I have never seen an OSO or DSO deal, that's going to bring anything less than multi-millions of dollars to, the doctor partner. And maybe it's not in the tens, but it's certainly in the single digits. And we just acknowledged, if you believe it, that you don't get any happier after you get $1 million. So, I mean, you're kind of pissing in the wind a little bit, I think. And so you go, well, why would I do this? You look at the practices that are growing versus not growing. The DSOs have done the hard work and made the cuts and implemented the things. And yeah, if one of your staff people leaves, maybe the group you're with says, right now we're not going to rehire that position. That's a responsible business decision that most independent doctors don't make. And there's 100 other examples of things that they probably can do better, because these are MBAs that know how to run companies, not clinicians who know how to diagnose and treat teeth. That's your job. If you are a person that's in that cohort we talked about, 1.6 to 2 million plus, and you think it's impossible to get to 3, by gosh, I bet if you sell one, your practice will go to 3. It's not magic. It's just there's a different skill set, and you don't have the full set of tools that you need to get from 2 to 3 or 1.5 to 3. So they can do those kinds of things. So the money works out. I think the interesting conversations are, you're so analytical as a group that you start looking at these calculators and looking at deals, and you start getting caught up in well, I have $2 million more at the end of my life if I do it alone versus if I do this deal. But, what about the other things that they can do well? And I'm not an advocate for or against. I don't think there's a moral component to a DSO or OSO. I just think they're a great option for some people. And it's not just,
Great.
hey, I'm big and nobody can afford my practice. It's, hey, I don't know how to get bigger, and I want that community that's going to help me get bigger. So there's a lot of places where it fits. I think financially it works almost every time. Having said that, I think it's fair to acknowledge on this call that there's some distressed OSO assets out there right now.
And I wanted to
That
talk about. I wanted to jump in and
yeah,
and, and
that
before
people
we
know
get there,
about, and
before
so you got to be
before we
careful
get
who
there,
you get in bed with.
but I want to talk about that. I want to jump in, but I just
Yeah,
want to step in for just a second because it's not all peaches and cream. It's not all rosy. There are times it's not going to work out well, and I think there's even other discussions to be had about OSOs and DSOs, which is they're not all built the same, right? There are great OSOs, right? And there's a few that you and I talked about earlier before we started recording that are doing things radically different, right? Like, for instance, I'm an advocate for smile doctors. Why? Because I'm a member. I'm always looking for great members. But their idea of the joint venture model, which others might not be doing, is a huge difference in terms of like, is the OSO innovating? Are they looking for new ways, right? But on the other hand, Smile Doctors has been through a couple of equity turns. They're the only one who've done it in the U.S. as far as I know with an OSO, right? And
yep,
but that doesn't mean they're the only one that you can trust, right? There are other players, but talk as much as you're comfortable talking about the state of OSOs today in the United States, just in US, not even North America, and what you would tell somebody out there who's listening and saying, I've heard a lot about OSOs. I've heard people say they're bad. I've heard people say they're good. I'm kind of leaning to the idea that it's something I might want to do down the road, but I don't really know much about the big players who are out there, and are they all the same? And what if I'm offered 6.5x, multiple which you heard unfortunately way too many times. We're both kind of giggling at that one. What advice would you give people in terms of and talk about brands in any way you're comfortable talking, because you have full immunity when you're on the show, okay?
yeah, thanks. I'll try not to recognize, call out any really names, but I think you got to have somebody guide you through this. You guys are all smart. You have people and friends that are in the different groups. They'll give you their opinion, but you really need somebody that has an understanding of the PE group behind, and where they are in their recap cycle, how they're capitalized, where they are in their against their debt covenants. I mean, there's some things you just need to understand about each of the different groups, and they all have different personalities. I think Smile Doctors is 12 years old, or are they 13, 12 or 13 years old,
I don't
right?
know the exact number.
Yeah, I think it's 12. So it's really relatively young. And Smile Doctors, if you want to look at it from a risk perspective, is the lowest risk deal because they've recapped 3 times. They're 500 ish, plus or minus. I don't know the exact number. Doctors. They're extremely well managed, and is every partner doctor a 10 out of 10 on the joy scale with them? No, but it's not because they're bad people. It's just we all have different personalities, and so they've been around and they've proven the game. All the other OSOs, of which there are probably 2 dozen, and none of them have recapped yet, to your point earlier. And so there's a little bit of a freeze now in with regards to attracting practices to buy, and I think it's probably affecting Smile Doctors as well, because of interest rates. So the cost of capital is high, because practices aren't growing, and that's you want to buy a growing practice, not a declining practice, and there's not as many growing practices, and because a lot of advisors are saying, if you don't look at Smile Doctors, why would you want to do it with X or Y or Z? Because they haven't proven that they can do what Smile Doctors has done 3 times already, and so a lot of people are going on a wait and see kind of thing. Are these guys going to go away? No. Will there be consolidation with some of these distressed assets? Probably get either refinanced or uh, acquired by some of the stronger assets. I think so, and so I do think over the next decade we're going to see more and more practices go with groups. I think it's important for the AO leadership to understand that, and I think they do, because they need to include all the groups. I think in their long term planning, we want all the doctors to be AAO members. That makes for a stronger membership and better meetings and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, if you fast forward to maybe my deathbed, I think we're going to see a consolidation, and there's going to be some winners and some losers. But the losers are not going to disappear; they're going to be eaten by bigger companies that are going to acquire them and make them better. So, you got to be careful. I'm not afraid of them. I'm not an advocate saying you have to do this. I think you've heard me say many times. The listeners have. Independent private practice ownership is there for generations to come. If my
Yeah.
kid was smart enough to be an orthodontist and wanted to be one, I would say we can go to market anywhere in the United States and we can do great anywhere. And it's just that good in ortho still, and it will be for many generations. And I can't see past
I love
several
hearing that.
generations, but it's a good deal. And what DSOs and OSOs are an option. So it's know thyself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your goals? If a group helps you get there, it can be a really positive thing.
By the way, I think it's the first time anybody on the podcast has ever mentioned the word deathbed. So
Hey, I'm
thanks
closer
for
to it
bringing
than
this one
anyone else.
down in a hurry. Yeah, so let's just hope that's a long time from now, Chris, because we need you
Yeah,
around. And
I'm
as we're
feeling
starting to
good.
close, as we get close to being done with this, let me ask you one quick question, right? This is like, tell me the Bible while you stand on one leg. Um, if I'm a young doc out there who says, I was approached by an OSO, not one of the name brands, there've been some distressed assets out there, and I don't want to get into it now because it's a long conversation about companies that went to market and didn't necessarily do as well as they wanted to or got rejected, so to speak. But if I'm a young doctor who's approached by a non-name brand OSO and they say, hey, we're putting together an OSO, you're going to be one of our first orthodontists. We got some doctors. It's not even an OSO. We're going to bring in some oral surgeons, some pediatrics. We're going to do the trifecta model, as one very prominent person likes to use that term. I see you laughing as well. But they said to me, I could get a 6.5x on this. I get a 9x on this. What would be your advice to that human being in terms of um, yes, or like, is this something they should be considering, or what are they looking for that they're not going to get in, say, two or three of the much safer, in my opinion, options that are out there? And is it really worth it to start chasing those? We have 5 doctors. Why don't you join us? We have 15 doctors. Why don't you join us? Do you feel the same way as I do? Like, why would you go after that when you've got some very reasonable, good options? I'm not saying just smile doctors, but there's a couple of others out there that are probably going to do just fine and have a lot more infrastructure and have already done a lot of the heavy lifting and have de-risked in many, many ways.
If you're in any OSO of any size, it takes effort to build the systems, to have the people to learn what you need to learn, to be able to execute effectively. These guys work their butts off that are not you, and not the orthodontists. I mean, they're all smart and they do well, but you know, it's a Vegas question, but some people bet the farm and some people, have a different way to look at it. I mean, to answer your question, you started saying if I was a young doctor, if I was super young and I was super jazzed and I thought I knew these people, I'm going, listen, I wouldn't do it, but you're young. And if you lose everything, it doesn't matter because you're going to be fine. If you've been in practice 10 years and you've got a family, that's an expensive decision if it doesn't go well in many ways. And so you want to de-risk. And I found in my life, as you incrementally age, you de-risk. And so, if I'm in my 40s and 50s and I've got a family and I've got kids and I want to think about what the next best great move is for my career and for my practice, my patients, my staff, I'm going to be very careful, and I'm going to pick an advisor who knows what's what and can guide me on that. But if I have a flyer that, this is like somebody coming into you because you've got a lot of money and they want you to invest in their idea. When you start making money, those people find you. So you got to be careful about making a bad investment.
And by the way, I will I will never forget you said that to me. I'll never forget you said that to me. We had that conversation before I joined Smile Doctors, and by the way, you were instrumental in my helping me make better decisions at that time. But everybody listen to this. Chris Bentson himself told me before I joined, when you join these OSOs and you're with all these other high net wealth individuals who somehow been paid huge sums of money when they joined as well, the money's somehow going to find you. Like, people are going to find you with private equity options, with venture capital, with startup options. You have to be careful with some of them. But the funny thing is how they find you. And to me, that's one of the biggest benefits of joining a group, is that suddenly you see things through. It's like the Wizard of Oz when you go from black and white to color. It's really funny how all of a sudden these opportunities become available.
It's so true. I mean, if you listen to Scott Galloway and some of his stuff, he tells MBAs, he goes, get to a big city because that's where the A players are, and start your career there. And, if you're on the court every day with Roger Federer, your game is going to get better. And when you join any of these groups, you get to be in a circle of people that have a network and contacts that you don't have in private practice, and the ability to make some investments and financial decisions, and have the opportunities to participate in things you wouldn't ever dream of come your way. So it's one of the side benefits that I think is a lot of fun, especially for people that it's not all about diagnosing and treating teeth. You like the business side. That is a fun part of a benefit that comes with being in a group, but you have to be in the right group. I think Smile Doctors has done
Oh, yeah.
fantastic with their folks and sharing information and networks with folks, and you just have a lot of opportunities. I'm sure you have.
I always tell people, if anybody ever wants to talk about Smile Doctors, just reach out to me. I'll always be honest. I don't ever talk anybody into it. I just want them to go in with their eyes open. And I think there's too many people out there, when they hear OSO, DSO, they want everybody to run and scream that the sky is falling and the world is falling apart and they're terrible for the profession, and don't join one. They're evil empires. And it's just not true. And granted, aside from Smile Doctors in North America, or at least US, nobody else is recapped as an OSO, but it's going to happen. And that's my final question for you is, with the economy hopefully in 2025 turning around a bit, if what you say and what many economists say is true, what does that mean for OSOs and DSOs? I assume if interest rates drop, if the economy becomes more robust and companies start showing more profit, more and more money flocks into private equity, and more money wants good investments, and they want profitable, lucrative investments. Would we want to say, without putting words in your mouth, that in 2025 and 26, the number of deals we see happening from an enterprise level, not the individual investor, so to speak, but that, the Smile Doctors, the SOPs, the OPs, blah, 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 that we're going to see more of these companies start to go through acquisition because money's there and it's cheaper?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any two ways about it. I mean, DICOMIA is kind of an OSO DSO meeting for the nerd squad, and they do an extremely great job at that meeting. But that meeting had 2,000 people at it. It's twice as big as the ADSO meeting. The tenor of that meeting was way different than it has been the last 2 years, is all the feedback that I've gotten. And they are ready for the cost of capital to go lower, i.e. interest rates. We're ready for inflation to go lower, and we're ready for practice growth to occur. And the baseline mathematics of most of these OSOs and DSOs are, I can buy EBITDA very efficiently, especially if the cost of capital is reasonable. It's not right now compared to what it has been. And so as that goes down, that's going to incent people, and they have the money, and their investors want to spend the money. And the other half of the equation is, I want my member doctor practices to be growing at faster than 3%, year over year growth at 5, 6, 7%. And the thesis of most of these groups is at 6%. And that's been very difficult to achieve for the entire, cohort of practice members. But once we get practice growth going and interest rates going down, it's going to ignite a fire. And we're going to see it. I don't know if it'll be back to 21 levels, because that was, Cowboys and Indians days, but we're going to see lots more acquisitions happening than have happened in the last 3 years.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. And again, the good and the bad, Chris, is this has all been documented now. All these prognostications are here on living color.
Hey, I'll stand by it. I'll stand by everything we've said today. I really believe that it's not too far fetched, and it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be the second half of 25 is going to be great, or it's going to happen a little bit earlier, but it's going to start getting better for everybody on the growth side in 25, and it's going to continue into 26 and 7.
That'd be amazing. Amazing. And thank you for being such a great resource. Thank you for being who you are and helping us all make better sense of all of this and making better decisions. And I can't wait to see you wherever I see you next. I don't know where it'll be, but I hope it's not too distant.